Welcome back to how they can fix blank in Warhammer 2. Today we'll be going over diplomacy. If you're not familiar with the layout, I'm going to first outline the problems and then go through them one by one, offering my personal solutions. Now these videos are made from my opinions and experiences and are not the one solution to these problems. They're just these solutions that I've come up with and that I think would be quite good. If you have different solutions or different problems, then please leave them down in the comments below. Okay, so let's outline the problems. So first of all, we have the chances of success. This low, medium and high stuff just isn't really cutting it. I get you don't want it to be super clear and it's always a chance, but if I can make the same deal over and over and over again until I reach the point that it works, it's kind of just a waste of time. The next one is reliability. Now, how does this mystical currency work and why can we not see things that will affect it if it has such a bearing on diplomacy? It's one of those things that if you manage to tank it, it can really badly affect your campaign. But you don't really know how you tanked it to begin with, so it can be very confusing. Trade is also kind of a problem. It is way too simple in Warhammer 2, which is okay, but it can be a lot better. The issue really stems from the fact that tradable resources are quite pointless, so looking at a way to make them more useful would be interesting. We're also missing a few diplomatic options from older games that bring a lot in terms of strategy and also hilarious AI requests. We all remember the do not attack or we will attack diplomacy proposals, so I'd like to see more of that. And finally, diplomatic traits. Every faction has these in the current game, and they're often hard to work out what they mean, and also hard to see in action. They don't really give you a good idea of how the faction is going to behave, so seem to serve no purpose. Now let's go through and solve each of these problems one by one, starting with chances of success. As I mentioned, it just shows your rating out of low, medium or high, which is kind of pointless because if I'm just going to go through make the same deal over and over again to find out when I can get it to work, then just show me the points. We already have a system like this in Troy and 3K, and they are really great and make trade into more strategy than blind chance. The point system means I know exactly how much more I need to put in to have a chance of getting a good deal. If the scales tipped ever so slightly in my favor, it means I can milk a little bit more gold out of the enemy, and if the scales are tipped in their favor, then I can swing the deal a little bit to increase the chances that they'll accept it. The quick deal option in 3 Kingdoms is also incredible, so if I click this, I can see who will accept any kind of deal I can propose. So this is non-aggression pact, trade agreements, even peace treaties. So it's a great way to do a bunch of deals en masse. Say you are in a lot of wars and you want to see who will accept peace, you click this and you can see who is likely to accept. Say you want to get a bunch of trade agreements, you click this, you see who is likely to accept and who is not. It's a simple system and it's done right, and it means an idiot like me can do diplomacy really easily. Also allows you to fine-tune it to get the most out of every deal. So say I want to get a trade agreement with a faction and it's coming off that the deal is a lot better for them than it is for me, then I can tweak it ever so slightly to get more gold or food or trade resource or whatever from them to make sure that it's fair. It's a brilliant system through and through, and it absolutely should be in Warhammer 3. Now back to the chances of success, it doesn't really help things that the AI in Warhammer 2 behaves so strangely that predicting what they're going to do is nigh on impossible. Now I'll have to come back to this later because it's to do with the trait system, which is just super weird and hard to understand. So the simple fix to this is just show us the chance like they do in 3 Kingdoms. Don't give us low, medium or high, give us, oh well, this is 1 point in your favor or 1 point in the enemy's favor. And then if it's not fair in the enemies, it will clearly show that they're not going to accept that deal, so you can't even propose it. Now next up we have reliability. This mystical currency has so much bearing over diplomacy and the game never really bothers to explain. Now it probably just needs better explaining, but I think we can have a little bit more fun than that and make this into an actual system rather than just a bar that goes up and down. Now I propose a system where every action affects your reliability, possibly per faction, because let's be honest, if you break a trade agreement with the High Elves, are they really going to walk over to the Dwarves and tell them not to trust you? No, that is like all the factions sat around the lunch table gossiping about who you were nasty to, and it makes zero sense.
You can't sit with us!
So having a reliability scale per faction would make a little bit more sense to me. So in my new system you have these 2 bars per faction, the regular opinion of you like we have now, and trust. Now you could put them into 1 to be honest, but this way you can still be liked but have broken a little bit of trust. Now they would of course affect each other but still be separate. So being trustworthy starts at neutral and builds up as you have a deal. They provide constant buffs, raising your trust. So say you have a trade agreement and a non-aggression pact, they are raising your trust whilst they're active. If you get rid of those agreements, then it will fall back to neutral. Now things like breaking deals unceremoniously, trespassing in their lands, or fighting against their allies will lower trust sharply, and it will take time to recover. Now having high trust gives you a bonus to opinion and vice versa, so if the faction really likes you, then it'll be easy to get them to trust you. Now to prevent this from sending you into a pit of bad trust and opinion, you'll have to set the values to allow you to get back to where you were. So say you break a deal and a faction starts to not really like you and not really trust you, it wouldn't be really fair if they don't like you because they don't trust you, and then they don't trust you because they don't like you. You would have to tweak the options so that it gives you a chance to get back to neutral and get back to being allies with them. Now, faction traits would affect this too. So, for example, all the Skaven are untrustworthy because, you know, they are. So any diplomatic action when you're playing as the Skaven, people aren't really going to trust you. On the other hand, a faction like the Dwarves would be very trustworthy because they are so serious about issues involving pen and paper. Now, a system like this would make reliability into less of a mystery and show you exactly how it's affecting your diplomacy. Of course, an alternate fix is to just combine it into the opinion rating. Well, that's way less fun. Now, next up we have trade. As I mentioned, it's ridiculously simple, but I think it could be a lot better. As I said, the issue stems from the fact that tradable resources aren't really used. If you look at a game like Civilization, resources are used for units. So, for example, having iron allows you to get knights. So the solution is make resources do something. Now, making it so you need certain resources for certain units would be quite interesting, but it would also be insanely complicated for certain factions, and it would just be a massive mess because you could be in the end game, and just because you don't have a certain resource, you can't recruit certain units, and it would be very frustrating. So I think making resources a sort of mechanic in every faction would probably work better, so they all use them differently and require different ones. Now, the Tomb Kings and the Dwarves already have the crafting mechanic that require them to have resources either via direct ownership or trade to craft items. If we implement something similar to this in more factions to incentivize the trade of certain resources rather than just straight gold, maybe make it so certain regiments of renown units require you to have a certain combination of resources. Maybe certain unique buildings in your empire require you to have access to those resources. Just anything to make them more important, because as it is right now, they are more or less just money buildings. Having the ability to trade resources you don't need for the ones you do need would be really great. Evil factions would need to be tweaked a little bit because they can never really get trade, so making this not as impactful for them would be wise. Now, I think implementing a system like is in Troy, where you have all the different resources and you can trade for them individually, is a little bit too complicated. The 5 different currencies, or however many it was, I wasn't really the biggest fan of that, but I think just making resources actually do something and maybe trade specific resources rather than just a general trade agreement would be good. Because as it stands, trade is just a way to make money. It's not really a way to do anything interesting. Now for some general diplomatic options that we are missing. As I mentioned, everybody loves the do not attack or we will attack diplomacy proposals, so if we could get more of that, that'd be A, hilarious, and also B, the system that relies on is also quite good. Ultimatums are great since it means you can leverage massive power over a faction in a risky move to get them to do something you want. It means you don't need a faction to like you to have successful diplomacy with them. This would make it so that a lot of evil factions can actually engage in diplomacy rather than just being in constant wars. It opens up an entirely new way to play, because rather than ruling through popularity, you rule via supreme power and threats. It's realistic because how many evil factions would really engage in diplomacy other than just threats? It's also great role-playing because a lot of factions have ruled this way. The Empire in Star Wars and then the discount Disney Empire after them ruled with an iron fist. They didn't rule because people liked them, they ruled because people were scared. Now, region trading is also something that's missing, and I know exactly why. It's because factions don't have all the same buildings, so it could be slightly messy when you transfer over, say, a Lizardman settlement to the Tomb Kings. Now, an easy way to fix this is keep the settlement the same size, and any of the buildings in that settlement, you can do one of two things. Now, if they are similar buildings like walls, add a convert option that takes one turn and changes the building to one from your faction. Military buildings, you can convert them to one of your own of the same size. Alternatively, you could just get a partial refund on those buildings and then choose exactly what you use that money for to build your own. I think there's definitely ways to make it work, and they shouldn't be scared to do it just because it might be a little bit more complicated than it is in other games. Besides, how many times in other games have you got peace with someone but you've only given them peace because they give you the majority of their empire? Vassalization is all well and good, but having actual control over their regions, that's where it's really useful. Now, our final problem is the diplomatic traits. Every faction has these, and they are often hard to work out what they mean and see in action, and it doesn't give you a good idea of how the faction is going to behave, so they generally serve no purpose. Now, either remove these or explain them better and make sure the factions behave that way. Now, removing them is easy, but it makes diplomacy boring since every faction behaves the same. Having factions work differently makes the game feel more immersive since they shouldn't all be the same. So let's go through the base Warhammer 2 factions in rapid fire. High Elves, elitist and proud but masters of trade and diplomacy. They would rarely take a deal that doesn't benefit them more than the other party because of that pride. Now the Dark Elves, ruthless and sadistic but also very wealthy due to slavery. They're bloodthirsty, so respond best to threats and joining in wars, and are never one to shy away from bribery. The lizard men are cold-blooded and keep to themselves. Anyone who isn't a lizard has a hard time engaging with them. Although the only thing they hate more than outsiders is chaos, so anyone actively opposing chaos is automatically more trustworthy. And the Skaven, they're treacherous and untrustworthy. They're as likely to break a treaty as they are to continue breathing. They will take most deals, but don't expect them to keep them. Now, we could go into every single other faction in the game, but I think for now, that is enough. Just look a little bit into the faction's lore, look at how they would behave, and shape their traits from that, but actually make it make a difference. We have the traits now, but can you really tell me a difference between interacting with the Empire and the Dwarves or Bretonnia? Because to me, they all behave pretty much the same. Now that concludes this video on how they can fix diplomacy in Warhammer 3. If I missed a problem, then be sure to let me know down in the comments, or if you have any better solutions to these problems or any others, then also leave that down in the comments. If you want to see more content on Warhammer 2 and strategy games in general, then be sure to subscribe to the channel because I put out videos every single week. For now though, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.